I'm Ryan O'Doud, and you're listening to Ryan's Audiobooks on the Issues Magazine channel. Today we're continuing with the Psychic Bible, the Apocryphal Scriptures of Genesis P-Orridge, in the Third Mind of the Temple of Psychic Youth. This is section 120. Part 13, The Process is the Product. Because this is such a long chapter of the book, I will be splitting it up into 3 sections over 3 days. This is Section A. A primary analysis of the Process Church in relation to the Temple of Psychic Youth, as it is. This essay is intended as a first-sight analysis of some of the primary symbolism of the Process Church. It is neither comprehensive nor the final word on the subject. As the basic structure, I have adapted some of my ongoing researches into an evolutionary development of the Kabbalistic tree of life, termed the Tree of Psychic Integration, or TOPI tree. In essence, the center of cognition, the ego and the self, or Yesod and Tiphareth, to give their Kabbalistic names. For those unfamiliar with the basic structure of the tree, I will set out a few preliminaries, contextualized for the subsequent discussion. Again, these are not comprehensive. Editor's note. This whole entire part of the book has a lot of visuals, so I recommend you find a PDF copy or purchase a copy of the book to reference. Moving on. The first point of analysis rests with the fourfold structure adopted by the process and the parallel structure in the Kabbalah, which posits 4 worlds of existence known as Atziluth, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asaya, and generally symbolized by the elements fire, water, air, and earth. In ontological terms, these equate with spirituality, creativity, unconscious mind, intellectual conscious mind, and sensuality, practical or fixed reality. Table 1 below shows the directional elemental correspondences utilized by the process. Editor's note, there is a table. It's 3 columns of 4 words. On the leftmost column says Satan, Christ, Lucifer, Jehovah. On the center says fire, water, air, earth. And on the right column it says west, east, south, north. Moving on. In terms of the TOPI tree, the first point of analysis is via the elemental attributions. The diagram below shows on the left the standard tree of life as adopted by 19th century occultism, and on the right the tree of psychic integration. Both trees comprise 10 spheres of form or consciousness known as Sephira, plural Sephiroth, connected by 22 passive dynamic force. Editor's note, there's another table. On the left is the common Sephiroth, the tree of life. You've seen it before if you're a magician. On the right is a slightly altered version, called the Tree of Psychic Integration. I recommend looking it up online. Moving on. The main difference of the reconfigured TOPI tree is the elevation of the solar-lunar axis, Tiphareth and Yesod, which I have said represent respectively self and ego consciousness. Essentially, what has happened is that both centers are raised to act as conscious mediators and filters between the psychic processes known as Yesod, or ego daily consciousness, now has direct contact with the 2 spheres representing morality, Geburah, or restriction, and Chesed, or expansion. This apparently minor alteration in the structural design has significant repercussions in developing an integrated and awakened psyche. Space precludes a detailed discussion, but readers interested in exploring this further are welcome to contact the address given at the end of this essay. In the center of the TOPI tree is a skeleton, or hardwiring, that engenders the integrated state. This is shown in Figure 2 below. Editor's note, it's a picture of the Psychic Cross. The following analysis will be based largely on Figure 2, known as the Psychic Cross. As shown in Table 1, the original Process Church adopted a 4-fold scheme based on Judeo-Christian religious archetypes and directional and elemental correspondences. These can be represented graphically as follows. See Figure 3. Editor's note. What we're looking at here is a 2-dimensional Cartesian plot. Arrows up, arrows left and right. The top says Jehovah, north, earth. The right side said Christ, east, water. The south side says Lucifer, south, air. And the left side said Satan, west, fire. Moving on. That this imposes a polarized or disintegrated dynamic should be immediately apparent, even to the most casual observer. Utilizing the Kabbalistic arrangement of the 4 worlds, the elements can be categorized as shown in Table 2. We got another table. Editor's note. The 4 Kabbalistic worlds with associated elements and psychological role. All right, I'm just going to read them from left to right, one at a time. Azaluth, divine realm, emanation equals fire equals spirit. Down. Bariah, creative realm equals water equals emotion. Down. Yetzirah, formative realm equals air equals intellect. Down. Asaya, active material realm equals earth equals physicality. Moving on. This arrangement can be transfigured onto the psychic cross as shown in figure 4. Editor's note. There's another figure, is psychic cross. Psychic cross. There are 4 arrows pointing to the center column. From top to bottom, it's Azaluth, Bariah, Yetzirah, and Asaya. Moving on. Special attention should be paid to the shortened center bar separating Bariah and Yetzirah. This symbolizes the fluidity of exchange between the lower and higher realms of psychic activity. It is precisely here, i.e., as a space that is unfixed in matter, that consciousness operates. Kabbalistic theory suggests that the human animal spans 3 of these 4 worlds. Thus, for example, while we remain rooted in matter, Asaya, we are unable to reach the highest world of spirit, God, Asalith. This is signaled by extended bar below, Atzaluth. To reach this peak state, we need to disembody or leave Asaya. It is thus by operating from Yetzirah, which equated with the astral realm in the Western magical system, that we can reach the highest point. This is the ecstatic or out-of-body experience. See figure below. Editor's note, you're looking at another psychic cross. The one on the left labels Asaya as the bottom, Atzaluth as the top. The one on the right just basically shows an arrow representing how you go up the cross. Moving on. Using this basic world structure, it is possible to obtain a number of insights into the symbolism of the process church. The initial method involves the primary symbol of the process God form and the superimposition of the associated element. Thus, for Satan, we use the inverted Calvary cross and the element of fire. This is, there's a table here. Upper left corner, it shows the symbol for air, and it says it's air. There's a triangle superimposed on the bottom half of the psychic cross. Up Yetzirah, down Asaya, and it says area of focus, and it's an arrow moving upward. Like I said, I recommend strongly you get these visual aids yourself. I'm going to try to describe them, but it would be best to just look at them yourself. Moving on. In the previous diagram, the upper 2 bars of the psychic cross have been removed. The dotted lines complete a triangulation forming the alchemical symbol for the element fire. The lower crossbar symbolically defines the area of psychic activity and serves to accentuate the lower realm or matter of earth. Kabbalistically, Asaya. This coincides with the traditional notion of Satan as prince of this, i.e., realm. In figure 7 below, we reverse the above procedure in order to obtain the cavalry or Christian cross in the process element of water. Editor's note, there's another table. It's a solid black line moving upward and downward. There's a triangle superimposed on it, pointed to the bottom of it. In the bottom right of the table, there's a downward pointing triangle, and it says it's equal to water. In the upper right, there's an up and down arrow, and it says Azaluth equals the area of focus. Moving on. In the second configuration, the lower 2 bars of the psychic cross have to be removed. Again, the triangulation shown by the dotted lines discloses the elemental sign for water. The natural psychic focus here is above the extended bar into the realm of divine emanation immediately. Kabbalistically, as at Zaluth. This is focus on God, in whatever lack of form one chooses. Its skeptical significance is in its use to develop belief structures that rely on an afterlife, while the corollary of a relative disregard for events in the manifest world. In figure 8 below, we utilize a composite form to represent the Luciferian cross. Editor's note, there's another table. This still shows the bottom half of the psychic cross. This is a repeat of figure 8 from earlier. Moving on. In this third configuration, the uppermost crossbar of the psychic cross has been removed. The triangulation forms a symbol for air. Here, the principal point of focus is on the world of matter below the extended bar, but an additional dynamic is introduced by the addition of the Yitzharatic influence, the area between the 2 bars. This immediate realm is the place of unlimited forms or the astral plane. This effectively symbolizes the Luciferian conjunction of sensuality and unlimited choice and expression. It also incorporates the sphere of Yesod within the focus, indicating sexuality and ecocentricity or pride. The final composite formulation, representing Jehovah, is shown in figure 9 below. Editor's note, there's another figure. It's the top half of the Psychick Cross, with a bottom-facing triangle superimposed on it. In the bottom left, there's a downward-facing triangle with a line through it that says equal to Earth. At the top, it says Absoluth. And then at the middle, it says Bria. And then there's an arrow pointing upward, and it says Area of Focus. Moving on. In this design, we have omitted the lower bar of the Psychic Cross. The triangulation depicts the symbol for the element Earth. In this configuration, the principal focus is on the divine world beyond the uppermost crossbar. However, the zone between the extended and shortened bar represents the Beatic world, or world of creation. In the classical Judeo-Christian scriptures, it is Yahweh, or Jehovah, who initiates the sequence of creation. According to Kabbalistic theory, Jehovah is also the first tangible reflection of the entirely unmanifest Godhead. Closer analysis of the above scheme reveals an apparent paradox in that, for example, the symbol of fire, and therefore the divine realm, is associated with Satan, whose focus is on the earthly realm. This seeming inconsistency is suggestive, however, of an inner dynamic, and I would suggest that the elemental symbol signifies a shadow reality that complements or contradicts, depending on perspective and application, the primary area of focus. This provides a secondary area analysis, repeating the sequence used before we get. And it says Satan equals, and then it shows an upward voicing triangle, and then it shows an arrow pointing upwards. As previously said, the primary focus is on Asaya, below the bar. The fire symbol representing spirit opposes this, thus prefiguring or shadowing the main dynamic action. In a sense, then, the element describes what is not, or in this instance, a discarding of spiritual notions. In Jungian terminology, Satan is the sensualist or physical type, with a degraded or inactive intuitive side, thus earth is opposing fire. And it shows Christ equals downward-facing arrow, or an arrow that has its head inverted to face downward. Again, the element shadows the main focal point, predicting a yet-to-be-achieved balance. The lack of earthing inherent in the disembodied point of focus leads, I would suggest, to emotional instability or lack of relatedness. It is this in an extreme form that has led to the establishment by Catholic Church of a celibate priesthood. The symbol for water is also, of course, equally a symbol for the yoni, or female sexuality, which may in itself help explain the patriarchal form that Christian society has followed. In Jungian terminology, this is the intuitive type with a degraded or inactive emotional side, thus fire is opposing water. The remaining two forms are necessarily more complex, but a similar ambivalence rises. It shows Lucifer equals, it's an upward-facing triangle with a line through it, and it shows an arrow with an extra line on the inside of the arrowhead. The Luciferian cross represents abandon and unrestricted sensuality, entirely at odds with the elemental correspondent air, which is symbolic of the intellect. In Jungian psychotopology, the Luciferian is a feeling type, of which the negative or degraded counterpart is thinking. Thus again, we have a situation where a shadow element attributed by the process church opposes the primary psychological type by the chosen nomenclature. Here, water opposes air. And it shows Jehovah equals a downward-facing triangle with a line through it, or an arrow with the head inverted with an extra line inside of it. The same situation holds true for the final cross-element combination. Jehovah represents the creative intellect, that is, the creation of reality via the mode of mentation and speech. In essence, the biblical creation myth deals with linguistic encodings of future possibility. It could be recalled that it was only after the fall from Eden that physical actuality became an issue. The element attributed by the process church is earth, but what we in fact have in Jungian terms is an intellectual type opposing hands-on practicality. Air opposes earth. And there's a figure here, editor's note, that shows two psychic crosses, one slightly down from the first one that connects the top of the right one to the middle of the left one. Putting all this together helps illustrate an inherent weakness in the system adopted by the process, where four facets of quaternity were depicted thus. In figure 10, it shows the process symbol with Jehovah, Christ, Lucifer, and Satan listed. Using the Kabbalistic reconfiguration, we instead obtain a process of flow which can be represented in the following way. Editor's note, figure 11. We're back to the Cartesian design, except now the middle line is only a downward arrow. The left-to-right line is only a rightward-facing arrow. It says Satan at the top with an upward-facing triangle, Christ at the right with a downward-facing triangle, Jehovah at the bottom with a downward-facing triangle with a line through it, and Lucifer at the left side with an upward-facing triangle with a line through it, and then two arrows, one from Jehovah to Lucifer and one from Christ to Satan. The resultant shape in Figure 11 is somewhat like a butterfly or perhaps a Mobius strip, in which a continual loop of activity and interaction is established. This is quite at odds with the structural rigidity depicted in Figure 10. Figure 12 is the same as before, but it's connected the Cartesian plot lines to the upward and leftward facing arrows. The dynamic is now fourfold within any one event structure. Moreover, we have a symbol of perpetual motion, evolution, and can trace the logical ascent through the four elements, earth to air to water to fire, or Jehovah to Lucifer to Christ to Satan. Space preludes doing so in any great detail, but the Jehovah to Satan sequence can be followed mythically as creation to fall to redemption to revelation. So far as I have dealt only with what I would term the macrocosmic level. Utilizing the tree of psychic integration, the basic fourfold system can be explored via the Sephirotic correspondences, i.e., microcosmically. According to process church literature, the four types of designated directions are as follows: Jehovah equals north, Lucifer equals south, Satan equals west, and Christ equals east. Each direction can be assigned a Sephirah in accordance with Kabbalistic traditions. Thus, north equals Geburah equals Jehovah, south equals Chesed equals Lucifer, west equals Yesod equals Satan, east equals Tiphareth equals Christ. They are highlighted on the tree shown in Figure 13, and it is showing the same figure it showed towards the beginning where they slightly changed the Sephiroth. You're just going to have to look it up. Some basic Sephirotic correspondences are outlined below. Jehovah equals Geburah equals Mars equals severity equals justice equals restriction equals fear. Lucifer equals Chesed equals Jupiter equals grace equals mercy equals expansion equals love. Satan equals Yesod equals moon equals foundation equals ego equals sexual organs equals conscious mind equals illusion. Christ equals Tiphareth equals sun equals beauty equals self equals heart equals inner equals teacher. The Sephirotic descriptions are primarily concerned with inner balance rather than overt orientation. Thus, a Jehovan, utilizing the appropriate cross, may have any combination of the Sephiroth active at any one time. This provides for means for adjusting and fine-tuning the psyche. For example, the Jehovan cross focuses on air whilst being shadowed by earth. Referring back to Figure 6, we know that earthly focus is represented by Satan, and Sephirotically, via the directional designation, is the Sephirah Yesod. This is also the moon, suggesting that lunar-based rituals designed to generate flow and flexibility may be useful for the primary Jehovan type. A basic sigil to represent this is shown below, Figure 14. Editor's note. It's the top half of the Psychic Cross with the bottom line removed and replaced by a white circle. Any Sephiric combination can be used on any of the four crosses to indicate intent or to ritually invoke particular activity. Remaining on a practical note, as I come to the close, standard tarot workings can also be brought to bear on this process. The standard trump path designations available in many books apply, with the following exceptions brought about by reconfiguration of the Tree of Life into the TOPI tree. Strength/lust now runs between Chesed and Yesod. The tower now runs between Geburah and Yesod. As I said at the beginning, this essay is essentially a primary attempt at analysis, and the ideas expressed will clearly benefit from further exploration and discussion. That said, it should provide plentiful food for thought. I welcome any suggestions and correspondence and criticism of any of the ideas noted here. Exchange and interaction is the whole of the process. The goal is integration. So be it. Brother words. And there's a section break. Persistence of a Trinity. Observing symbols of correspondence. Through basic research in magic and enactment, there is a curious and peculiar relationship between three power symbols that are all familiar to us. These symbols, logos, sigils are the swastika, the process P-Cross, and the Psychick Cross, all of which coincidentally play a powerful role in demonstrating how the process is a group associated with power. Most of this research has been documented and established from the efforts of Father Malachi, with two final exceptions contributed by Brother C. All material presented has been established for the ongoing study in both construction and pattern within the means of dimensional reality and spatial memory rendered through symbols. Let us take notice of the swastika, perhaps one of the most universal power symbols to date. It has been used within various ethnic tribes in Europe and Asia as a powerful geometric structuring in numerous areas around the world, and more recently and notoriously for being the magical sigil and logo of the Nazi Party and later associated supremacist orders. When the swastika is flipped in reverse, a potentially interesting characteristic is revealed. We notice the shape is equally as powerful as when it is faced forward. Father Malachi has taken 4 reverse swastikas and placed them so that their limbs are intersecting and produce this arrangement. If we look at the center, something familiar is revealed to our eyes as we begin to eliminate the framework of these reverse swastikas. Notice then what these intersecting limbs have created by if we establish some negative space around the obstructing areas of what we are trying to see. Indeed, it is the process P-Cross. The connection undoubtedly opens up the possibilities and theories for further explaining the essence of power that the process comprises. Father Malachi then points out that if we were to similarly take 4 process P-Crosses and then place them so they are adjoining each other, then a reverse phenomena is presented. Again, we establish negative space in the surrounding areas to view the unusual construction which always tends to develop in the center of such arrangements. The swastika returns. Notice the process P-Cross and the swastika are extremely similar in their constructive elements of intersection, because both employ 4 sections of the same linear pieces which are perpendicular to one another at certain points. Perhaps that is why either is produced through 4 of the other together. This now brings us to the Psychick Cross, which is a symbol which defies interpretation, yet also proves itself to be the missing link in the dimensions that separate the swastika from the process P-Cross. Father Malachi attempted to simulate the process P-Cross by arranging 4 psychic crosses in a P formation. As a result, such was produced. It seemed in this instance that establishing negative space is not even necessary. What we have in the center is obviously a very conspicuous swastika. Brother C points the way to a 4th and final consistency of using 4 to 1 symbol to make a single one. This is when psychic crosses are placed in reverse P arrangement. What is produced is but the only possible assumption. To verify the format, we must establish negative space to reveal what is, of course, the process P-Cross. The next and final presentation is somewhat strange and peculiar, perhaps because it marks an unprecedented shift from the use of using 4 of any given particular symbol. In this case, Brother C used only 2 psychic crosses in a diagonal positioning as seen. As a result, again, the process P-Cross proves its consistency in defining dimensions in space. What we have then is the newly adapted symbol for the process publication X-Tool, X the Uner lying. So what we have learned from these connections is that all matter is related and therefore all power is the same. Brother Word's commentary on X-Tool for Transmedia Foundation, 1996. Section break. Even further, the metaphysics of sigils. The medium of process philosophy bears close resemblance to the artistic media of assemblage practiced in so many 20th century art forms. Robert C. Neville, Reconstruction of Thinking, page 310. The product is the process. Genesis P-Orridge, Psychic TV. 1. Created neither for gallery nor audience, the sigil art of Genesis P-Orridge represents a deeply private and personal aspect of his extensive creative output. Ostensibly simple collages whose works document his explorations into magical consciousness, work which continues today and is central to his worldview. Moreover, each sigil is essentially functional, centered on the initiation of agentive activity. That is, each was created as an intentional act of magic designed to modify the course of natural events. They are thus much more than mere representations of what magic might look like, and their existence constitutes a direct challenge to our understanding of the world into normative models of causality, meaning, and creativity. This approach to art implies a rejection of intellectualization and scientific causality, and equally, it undermines the critical means by which we generally approach a body of creative work. P-Orridge today refers to himself as a cultural engineer, and in his collection of sigils we have the toolbox with which he carries out his work. He uses art as a means of influence, treating the magical act not as that of creating a likeness in the hope that life will imitate fiction, but as the initiation of a mental push to get the impulse started and support it on its course. It is the priming and starting of an act. Suzanne Langer, Mind, an Essay in Human Feeling, verses 3, page 61. In P-Orridge's sigils, we meet a prioritization of process and action in which the aesthetic and the theoretical are secondary to the integration of intention with a wider reality. To consider these sigils in terms of conventional art criticism, in terms of aesthetics and form, would thus be to remove them from the context in which they were created and to place them in a frame antithetical to their purpose. Art for P-Orridge served as a sacred role, the integration of consciousness with the flexion of universal pattern. Art is not simply to be looked at, dissected, and critiqued, but to be experienced. Such radical nonconformity places boundaries of how best to discuss his work and generally forces a shift to anthropological, psychological, or philosophical approaches. Within this broad framework, the current discussion will explore some of the techniques employed by P-Orridge in the construction of sigils, but will do so from the relatively uncharted perspective of the metaphysics of process. It concludes with a speculation on how sigils actually work. Transmodernity. It is clear that P-Orridge does not conform to the conventions of the contemporary artist. True, he works from and within a tradition of iconoclasts, and the art world remains a central target for this, and his method owes much to postmodern and deconstructionist theory. This is readily borne out by his use of apparently random and found elements which he montages into sometimes didactic and occasionally confrontational pieces. He adopts the posture of the outsider, attacks social norms, and celebrates the art of diversity in the extreme. Yet for all this, the currency he works in is constructive. His focus is on the creative process and the development of his work, and especially and unusually on the work's creative effect. The language of P-Orridge's art is therefore not that of representation and challenge, but of invocation and change. The sigils he presents to us are intentionally active. That is, embedded within them is a principle of unmediated agency. He seeds the future, both personal and public, through his art, leading us into unknown and unformed future possibilities. This goes beyond the postmodernist trick of making us think, which is a wholly traditional value, and can instead be seen as a literal attempt to affect the real. His work does not so much change the way in which we see the world, but rather changes the world in which we see. This transformative focus places P-Orridge outside of the modernist and postmodernist tendency to teach about reality, or to teach how to interpret that reality according to cultural context, and aligns him with both magical and iconographic traditions. He thus reaches across time and can claim as much to be working from an ancient tradition as to be forging new modes of thought and new ways of living. His art in this senses extends beyond the aesthetic, beyond the didactic, beyond the confrontational, though it shares references with all these. It emerges as the documentation of an engagement with the universal process of creative advance. The future is uncertain, and it is future which P-Orridge invokes and explores. The art of sigils. Technically, sigils are simply signs or marks designed to effect a magical purpose. They are constructed from symbols and letters drawn from the wide lexicon of astrological and related symbologies, and understanding and creating them is largely a matter of intellectual analysis and translation. The operator or magician generally works to predetermined formulae and systems. Such was the predominant view of Western occultism in the late part of the 19th century. This belief in systems generated much scholarship in the area, but it also fueled in large part the somewhat obsessive search for ancient secrets and the resurrection of supposedly lost magical orders. The aim was to resurrect and then claim ownership of the authority of what was regarded as a hidden tradition. Authority was thus located firmly in the past. The artist and occultist Austin Osman Spare stands as a break with such developments through his radical use of intuitive approaches to magic. A fine and respected artist, his work as an official war artist can be found in the Imperial War Museum and has been the subject of several retrospective exhibitions. Spare attacked both the frame and the form of then-contemporary magic. He rejected the traditions of the past in favor of a highly personalized metaphysical map, alongside which he developed a system of word collage, which represented a shift away from the formulaic methods of magic promoted by groups such as the Golden Dawn. It is the method that is of interest in our present context. Taking the notion of spells at its most direct, Spare would simply identify his intended outcome in the form of a word or phrase and work to eliminate each repeated letter so that each appeared only once. A phrase such as "to meet the angels" would thus be written "to meet the angels," "to angels," "tom angels." The resultant distillation would then be structured in a stylized pattern, breaking down the relationship with textural linearity so as to present an abstract image in which the letters qua letters disappeared. Spare's work is influential on P-Orridge in several ways. Firstly, as an artist, Spare rejected the gallery conventions of his day, treating the art world with Nietzschean disdain. Secondly, in his rejection of traditional magical orders, he emphasized the transfer of authority from the other to the inner, thus paving the way for P-Orridge's wholly intuitive and asystematized approach to magic. Finally, in his methodological approach, he specified a process of distillation through which complex structures could be taken down to their elemental form, thus enabling a clarity of purpose to be achieved. This process of constructive deconstruction of elemental binding and combination emerges in a highly developed way in P-Orridge's sigils. The laws of reality are also the laws of thought. Ludwig Feuerbach, Principles of the Philosophy of the Future, page 63. Collaging reality. P-Orridge's sigil art is amongst his most private work, but it also provides the clearest indication of both his method and purpose. The harmony of the work provides its tone, the elements in direction. The process is one of a continual refinement so that everything that is necessary is included, everything that is unnecessary is set aside, and a balance of what remains is achieved. If Spare's work serves as a transitory moment in magical art, P-Orridge takes that moment into new territory, setting aside Spare's ultimately system-driven approach and emphasizing in its place a wholly intuitive and naturalistic process. The focus of P-Orridge's work is eminently practical. P-Orridge's sigils are invariably mixed media collages incorporating both found and created material. P-Orridge also makes extensive use of photography, often manipulating the image to mask both form and identity. In this way, he generalizes the particular. The aim is to draw out the essential characteristic of the target image, to purify it, and to intensify its effective potential. Images are overpainted and textured, text is added. The combined effect is to mutate the commonplace and to unify the divergent. In addition to this, images created during the process of ritual are frequently incorporated into the work, a strategy which mythologizes location and space. And finally, by the ritual embedding within the sigil of the present moment of creative activity, P-Orridge creates a dislocation in the linearity of time. He becomes genetically joined to the sigil. It becomes impossible to distinguish between the artist and the art, between the creator and the created. The emergent sigil can thus exercise its own creative agency over and against the artist in a full-fledged intersubjective dialogue. It signals its own completion in its own time. It is this radical disruption of the spatial and temporal modes of being which transforms the sigil from art as art to art as agent. Intention is the work of envisaging and enacting will. Ray L. Hart, Unfinished Man and the Imagination, page 148. Some metaphysics. What he is getting at is the idea that what we think of as a single universe is in fact a relational network of infinitely varied universes, each of which is centered in its own subjective being. Thus, the universe I perceive at any moment is a unique creation, as is the world I perceive a moment later. And each is my unique creation. What is more, Whitehead argues that the future is open to subjective manipulation. That is, even though we inhabit a realm where a vast array of fixed, or to be more exact, relatively consistent laws apply, the future is ultimately open. In Process and Reality, Whitehead explores how his vision of interrelating but atomized universes presents the kind of coherence which enables us to exist in the day-to-day manner to which we are so accustomed. The metaphysics is complex and controversial, but at its heart offers a view of reality in which process is the true stuff of reality and in which matter is little more than the documentation resulting from the activity and process of continuous becoming. It is this idea which lends itself to a more coherent and rational theory of magic, since it proposes that the fundamental stuff of reality is a process of creative emergence. Matter is simply the outcome of that activity. In discussing his own work, P-Orridge has consistently focused on process, describing the resultant artifacts as documentation. The creativity is centered in his own activity of making and engages the whole person. It is largely an interiorized mode of creative action, and in this sense is wholly subjective. This work is private in the most fundamental sense of the word, since it is located in the interior, conceptual, and structural arrangements of his modes of thought. The art emerging from this interiorized creativity is simply the documentation of his ritual engagement with present time. The English process philosopher Alfred North Whitehead wrote, "No two actual entities originate from an identical universe. The nexus of actual entities in the universe correlates to a concrescence is termed the actual world correlate to that concrescence." Process and Reality, page 22-23. 2. A process view of present time. In the previous section, the process of sigil construction was characterized as essentially one of engagement with present time. This needs some explanation. The concept owes much to Whitehead's process metaphysics and his idea that reality is made up not of substance, objective matter, but rather of events or activity. In developing his thought, he implied a concept of time which, whilst recognizing the formal flow of physical or perceptual time, treated its content somewhat unusually. In his scheme, the past is entirely objective, by which he meant inactive and unchanging. The future, in contrast, is indeterminate, a realm of potential possibilities. The present is entirely subjective and is the sole point of activity. Nothing in present time exists physically, since to be in the present is defined as undergoing a process of becoming determinate. But nothing outside this process of active determination is fully real. As an entity begins to emerge, it becomes more defined, more and more definite in its form, until it achieves a satisfactory shape and emerges into being. At this point, it becomes fixed and triggers a new creative process. Our world is, in these terms, a series of successive and radically interrelated processes, each informed by its predecessors and each informative of its successors. It is instructive to explore the notion of present and future time posited by Whitehead in the context of ritual engagement and magical act. A key element in Whitehead's system is that the future is open to subjective influence. Reality is not the result of physical causal chains, but rather of the imaginative invocation and manipulation of contexts. If we treat the process of ritual interiorization, such as undertaken by P-Orridge, as the maximization of subjective being, the objective world outside disappears from the ritual space to be replaced by the manifestation of a mental arena of the artist's own making. By entering a ritual space, we are in effect escaping the linear flow of time. Under such conditions, we are related neither to the past nor the future. We are conscious only of the now. Present time is thus extended and provides a space in which we self-consciously construct the form of our future emergence into reality. Whitehead termed this process concrescence, and it was affected by subjective prehension and harmonization of elements under the direction of a subjective aim. In less technical language, we can represent this as the organization and making concrete of what will emerge into physical existence by a means of gathering together diverse elements into a single reality. Whitehead further suggests that in the process of concrescence, the subject operator draws on past information, objective fact, distills and orders it according to initial aim, and harmonizes its elemental components until it reaches a state he terms its satisfaction. The subject then transforms from its active transformative or non-temporal state into a subject, essentially a moment of observable reality in the flow of physical time. It is the emergence of the superject which seeds the future. This idea of Whitehead's, which applies to all the stuff of the universe, bears comparison with a state of mind achieved during ritual, where connection with the external world is lost. In the apparent timelessness of ritual activity, the operator is free to construct out of just those elements he chooses. The construction is affected both mentally and physically. This reflects a further requirement of Whitehead's system, which insists on all entities having both a mental and physical pole. As above, so below. The process of creation is fundamentally a selective process of combination. That is, it requires bringing the diversity of available data together with the subjective imagination of the present aim in order to create a unified and concrete whole. The process involves the reversal of our ordinary understanding that causes produce effects. The cause must precede its effect in time, yet it must be presently existent in order to be active in producing its effect. Lewis Ford, The Lure of God, page 5. Part 3. Sigils as agents. Immersed in present time, P-Orridge creates a ritual space which he inhabits with consciousness. He steps forth into a sacred space outside of the linearity of time and becomes, in a literal sense, the architect of his own universe, the magician conjuring and shaping the elements to his will. He identifies his aim, expressed by invocation and empowered by the intensity of experience. And then he works, his energies brought to bear on a single purpose. He brings a new form into the actual world, a sigil emerges into reality. But how does it work? How does the sigil take effect? How can a product of human creativity change nature from its course? What follows is speculation, but it is grounded in the metaphysics of process, some of which have been touched on in the context of the ritual construction of sigils. The key is in a radical restatement of our notion of time. Creativity is the universal of universals, characterizing ultimate matter of fact. It is that ultimate principle by which the many, which are the universe disjunctively, become the one actual occasion, which is the universe conjunctively. It lies in the nature of things that the many enter into complex unity. When a non-conformal proposition is admitted into feeling, the reaction to the datum has resulted in the synthesis of fact with the alternative potentiality of the complex predicate. A novelty has emerged into creation. It is a new type of individual, and not merely a new intensity of individual feeling. That member of the locus has introduced a new form into the actual world, or at least an old form and a new function. Process and Reality, page 28, 187. A speculation on time. Our normal understanding treats time as the strictly linear measure of successive moments or events. This is the forward motion of time's arrow. Relativity theory suggests that it is bidirectional. The mathematics work equally well in either direction. But what is time? P-Orridge coined the phrase, time is that which emits, and this provides a clue which I propose to explore. Time is significant to P-Orridge, and its significance lies in his intuitive grasp and ritual experience of time's thickness. We can restate P-Orridge's phrase as a simple equation. Time equals emit. The one is the mirror of the other. We can take this a step further and propose that time is the expression of energy in emission. It is important here to note that this is not the same as saying that expressions of energy take place in time, but rather what we consider as the movement of time is an expression of energy. Now for some proposals. The first proposal is that there is a relationship of identity between energy and time, and that when we consider what we mean by time, we are considering the function of energy under another form. The second is that we consider our thoughts or mental activity as constituting high-energy states in contrast with physical existence or activity which occurs in low-energy states. All physically manifest objects, including atoms, are to be considered low energy. I leave the third step to Alfred North Whitehead, noting first that he requires that every entity has both a physical and mental aspect or pole. The mental pole is the subject determining its own ideal of itself by reference to eternal principles of valuation autonomously modified in their application to its own physical objective datum. Every actual entity is in time so far as its physical pole is concerned, but is out of time so far as its mental pole is concerned. It is a union of two worlds, namely the temporal world and the world of autonomous valuation. The world of autonomous valuation is for Whitehead out of time. We need to take this to mean out of linear time, since the process of valuation necessarily affects some degree of change in what is being valued. We cannot, under a process metaphysic, consider the possibility of timelessness, since that would imply a lack of process, a lack of change, and any change must be an expression of energy and thus of time. If the mental pole exists outside linear time, but cannot, because of its inherent activity, be atemporal, it must therefore be expressing time in some other way. We know from physics that the addition of energy increases the level of activity of atoms. They move faster, and that is the physical plane. A large increase in energy alters the physical state of materials. Solids melt, liquids vaporize. We also know that time is relative to the observer, and that rapid movement slows the passage of time relative to a fixed or stationary point. Atomic clocks run slow at altitude, and someone orbiting the Earth in a satellite ages marginally less quickly than those on Earth, even though an hour or a day feels the same under both set of conditions. What this is leading to is the suggestion that our sense of linear time is simply the result of relatively low energy existence. In order to retain physical coherence, there are limits, even at the atomic level, on how much energy we can express, and this limit is directly linked to our notion of linear time. But if time bears a relationship of identity with energy, and energy, which is simply activity by another name, is increased, then it becomes possible to imagine that at high levels of energy the physical limits are broken and existence emerges outside the tight constraints of linear time. This suggests that time, as fully conceived, has thickness or extension. Editor's note, there is another table here. It's a bit difficult to explain, but I'll try my best. So, The table appears to be a white arrow from left to right. Above that white arrow is a gradient that appears to be a downward-facing triangle, which connects the arrow before it is complete. Below the arrow is another gradient, which appears to be an upward-facing arrow, which connects to the same arrow in the middle before it is complete. The left says past, the right says future. The left to right word white arrow labels low energy equals linear time equals physical world. The gradient above it says high energy equals nonlinear equals non-physical equals present time. And the gradient below it says high energy equals nonlinear equals non-physical equals present time. Below that, the words the thickness of time. The arrow represents the normal progression of time and the location of the physical entities. The shaded represent the realm where high energy entities emerge outside the linear constraints. Moving on. I propose that mental activity, thought, is simply the emergence of entities into high-energy states. This goes beyond what Whitehead claims, but is arguably implicit in his position. We should also note here Whitehead's description of the non-temporal world as one of autonomous valuation, and take care to distinguish between the physical brain activity through which we engage with thought and the thought itself. But if we make the conceptual leap, we can begin to see how, for example, the mystic is able to transcend the limits of normal temporality and reach both into the past and the future. In the language of the magical traditions, this is the realm of hidden or occult activity, the ether, the astral plane. How sigils work. It was suggested earlier that ritual space constitutes a move into the extensiveness of present time, and that the primary characteristic of present time is its prioritizing of the subjective. Present time is where actuality is defined and shaped. By choosing to operate within this conceptual arena, P-Orridge is able to immerse himself in the fullness of his own subjectivity. His imaginative world becomes fluid and tangible, constrained only by the limits of future possibility. As he shapes his mental map of the future, isolates and defines his intention, he begins to construct. The emergent sigil shares his temporal and non-physical location, and thus shares also in the prioritization of subjective experience, which is the nature of present time. As Whitehead puts it, it is born into a world of autonomous valuation. A sigil so created is essentially a denizen of that world. As with all entities, the sigil has a mental and a physical aspect, but because of its unusual beginnings, the mental aspect is significantly heightened. This is in sharp contrast to artifacts created in the framework of physical time and primarily as objects of physical appreciation. In such cases, the created work is bound by its own objective beginnings. It is the heightening of its mental aspect which enables the sigil to exert agency. Upon its release from its ritual space, it is able to sustain its link with present time, even where it exists in the linear frame of physical time and space. It is this inborn access to continuing creative expression which constitutes the sigil's magical potency. For P-Orridge, the key to a sigil's effectiveness is in his management of its constituent elements. The environment at present time provides the potential, gives the sigil its nature, but it is the artist who provides and defines its function. That the sigil always enjoys autonomy of valuation means that the process remains always somewhat open or indeterminate with regard to its ultimate completion. It follows from this that the artist can never be certain of how the sigil will behave, and it is for this reason that P-Orridge incorporates a genetic link. The uncertainty does, however, serve an important purpose. Although it is possible to construct and control ritual space, the same cannot be said for the temporal everyday world, which is subject to innumerable competing imperatives. The sigil must await its opportunity to act, influencing and evaluating the patterns of physicality until such time as its encoded intention can be brought to fruition. It is a seed planted into the uncertainty of future time. It awaits only the conditions of the germination. Closing thoughts. In making public his sigils, Genesis P-Orridge has afforded us a rare opportunity to explore new worlds. Currently operating under the banner of the Next New Way On, he is inviting us to challenge our modes of thought and to develop new ways of engineering our futures. He once traveled across America in a yellow bus reminiscent of that used by the merry pranksters in the 60s, but on which the destination was now declared as even further. It was a declaration of his intent to push the boundaries of human experience into new territory, to unchain the limits of imaginative creativity. The sigils he has created over the past 20 years or so are part of this broader goal. We can, if we wish, treat his sigils as art, as objects to observe and admire, but we might also take them as an injunction to step over the line and explore the limits of our imagination. The only restrictions are those we place on ourselves. Paul Cecil, 23rd of January, 2002, England. Section break. Thus concludes section 120 of the Psychic Bible. This is part A of a 3-part series where I'm reading part 13. The process is the product. I continue tomorrow with part B of part 13, the process is the product. See you then.